It's going to be about a 1-hour flight from Utica, New York to Nashua, New Hampshire, a piece of cake for the pilot and owner of a Seneca. It was a trip he'd made many times, but this time, the weather wasn't great. Low ceilings and the freezing level at the surface. After he launched and went IMC, the performance of the plane began to deteriorate, even with full power. He was picking up ice, but not where he expected it. Where? We'll find out on this episode of The Writer Report. Hello everyone, I'm Rob Ryder, and welcome to the premiere episode of AvBrief's The Writer Report podcast, brought to you by Avemco Insurance. Vectors for Safety creator and human factors expert Gene Benson joins me today to share a story of a routine flight, a familiar ferry flight that turned dangerous as he was unable to maintain altitude while in the clouds. The lessons he learned are applicable to every pilot, irrespective of the years flown or hours in the logbook. Gene and I will chat about it right after this message from Avemco. Not all aircraft insurance policies and premiums are the same. As the only direct writer in the market, Avemco never uses third-party insurance agents and instead connects you directly with an aviation underwriter in their Frederick, Maryland office, ready to solve problems and approve coverage based on what you fly and how you fly it. Avemco provides lightning-fast quotes, competitive rates, and personalized policies that are easy to read and tailored to you. Call 800-353-9089 for your free quote, or visit avemco.com/Rider Report. Don't forget to tell them you're a Rider Report listener and save 5%. Premium credits are subject to underwriting guidelines, including Avemco-recognized training and memberships. Now, the Rider Report. My guest today on our inaugural program is Gene Benson. He's a pilot, CFII, human factors specialist, and the creator of Vectors for Safety. And with all those credentials, he's still got himself in a bit of a pickle with some ice. Gene, welcome to the Writer Report.
Hey, Rob, it's great to be here with you. I'm a great fan. I listen often.
We had a great run over there, and I'm glad you listened. And we're going to have a great run here as well. And we're going to treat it just like we have for the past 5 years. And I'm going to start by asking you how you got started with aviation.
Well, I was one of those kids that for somehow I was born with the aviation bug. I can't explain it, but I always was just really interested in airplanes. And the only toys I was ever interested in having were airplane toys. And of course, I built the model airplanes, the display models and the flyable models and the whole 9 yards. And there was an airport nearby, a county airport, but it wasn't really kid friendly very much. One day, out for the dreaded Sunday drive with my parents when I was 14 years old, we pulled in a little small private airport about 13 miles from our house that I didn't know ever existed. And we get out of the car, and my dad asked the owner if we could walk around and look at the airplanes. He said, "Oh, well, let me take you around and show you." And he spent about an hour with us walking down the flight line and telling us a little bit about every airplane that was there and telling us stories. And I was just, wow, I'm so close to these airplanes. It's unbelievable.
Do you by any chance remember any of the specific airplanes he showed you?
Oh, I do. There was a wooden twin-engine airplane that was we built by Cessna for transport in World War II. They used to call it the something bomber. I can't remember now what it was.
The
but anyway,
Bamboo Bomber.
Bamboo Bomber. Yes, very good. Thank you.
They call it the T-50, and my father-in-law was an instructor during the war, and he used to call it, some of his compatriots used to call it the useless 78, the UC-78. But you got to see a Bamboo Bomber when you were 14?
Well, better than that. It wasn't flyable, but they had decided to taxi it around for some reason, and not on that day, but later. they invited me to go, and I was in the back seat of it when they actually started up and taxied it around the ground. It was quite a thrill.
I bet
Yeah.
it was.
So this little airport, they were very friendly, and the owner somehow sensed how interested I was in aviation. He said, "Would you like a ride?" Oh, would I like a ride? Are you kidding me? Um, so he took me over to the little ops building, but they had a flying club there, and they had no availability that day. He said, "Well, if you come back next week, I'll get you a ride." Well, of course, I pestered my parents all week to make sure they got me back there the next week, and sure enough, they sent me up for a ride in a J3 Cub with a man who had just gotten his private pilot certificate the week before in the club, and so I was in the back, and he was in the front. And he took me up and he flew around, and he flew around this something that looked like an upside down ice cream cone on the ground. And it was a newly installed, what he called a VOR. And I had absolutely no idea what a VOR was, but I sure did find out later on. And that was the
Holy
highlight.
cow.
Yeah. There was, this was probably, I think 1960, I believe, or 60 or 61. And, we finished the flight, and it was unbelievable. They had a book for sale in there. There were very few books on flying back then, on the how to fly kind of thing. But they had one, kind of a textbook thing, and my parents bought it for me, and I took that home, and I just read that thing cover to cover to cover. And then I started going back to the airport regularly. Nobody would allow anybody to do this today, but at 13 years old, I was allowed to ride my bicycle, or 14 rather. I was allowed to ride my bicycle the 13 miles each way to go to the airport. And they had a dairy farm. Their main source of income there was not the airport. It was a dairy farm. And they told me if I wanted to work on the dairy farm, that I could earn some flying lessons. So, that was a no-brainer. So I would go and work on the dairy farm, and every once in a while they'd say, "Okay, you know what, you've earned a lesson, and here you go." And they also had a glider operation there, and on weekends I would work walking the wings of the gliders, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes at the end of the day, I'd get a glider ride. So that was pretty exciting too.
I
And
fully expected, Gene, to hear you say that you worked at the airport washing planes and being a line guy in order to earn your money. But in point of fact, what, you were milking cows to do it?
Well, they had milking machines, and I was present for that, but I was more working on the other end of the cows where, I had a lot of that. I worked in the fields, or in the summer, and the whole thing. They kept me pretty busy, but they were very fair about it. And I was the man and woman. They just became like my second parents there, and were very, very encouraging of me. And I my first official flying lesson in the logbook was at 14, and I just kept going with that. And by the time I was approaching my 16th birthday, old enough to solo, I had 60 hours in my logbook.
Wow.
So when somebody says, "How many hours did it take you to solo?" I say, "Well, it took me 60 hours to solo." And they look at me really funny, But my 16th birthday rolled around, and I got my student pilot certificate, my class 3 medical certificate, and I was ready to go. And it was a turf runway, and my birthday was in December. In upstate New York in December on a turf runway, there tends to not be a lot of flying going on.
I certainly understand that.
A snowstorm rolled in early in the morning, and my parents allowed me to take the day off from school, and they took me to the airport. And my flight instructor called, and he said, "It's going to clear. Just hang in there. It's going to clear." But I'm looking at how much snow was accumulating on the runway, and they didn't plow it, being turf, So wasn't sure if it was going to happen, but sure enough, about maybe 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon, the sky opened up. My flight instructor came wheeling in his car, I think on 2 wheels, and said, "Oh, let's go." By now, we were flying a Piper Tri-Pacer.
Wow.
I'd started in the J3, and then the wind blew that away one night, so they got a PA-17 Vagabond. I got about 10 hours in that, and then the wind blew that away one night. So then they got the Tri-Pacer. So my first solo was in the tripacer, and I was able to, able to accomplish it on that day, and I was golden. It was the best thing could have ever happened.
You did tell me you had a great flight instructor.
I want to give a shout out to him. His name is Ed Hayes. He's presently 94 years old, and I call him about every other week. He still lives in the Utica, New York area there. We have a great chat. He's a great guy, and I wouldn't have gotten where I was if it hadn't been for him.
That's so great that you can stay in touch with him, Gene. That's wonderful. I'm sure that every one of us has a person or a few people who were big inspirations as we accomplish different steps along our aviation journeys. But now, Gene, tell us what happened on your Rider Report incident. Set us up, when it was, what happened. Let's hear your story.
Sure. It was in 2000, and I believe it was March. I had an operation at Nashua, New Hampshire. By then, I was living in the New Hampshire area. But I also had an operation, a smaller operation at the Oneida County Airport in Utica. And the Seneca was used for multi-engine training at Utica, but I was trying to do all my maintenance back in New Hampshire. And the airplane was due for, it was probably a 100-hour inspection. There wasn't anything wrong with it, just needed inspection. So it was to be a repositioning flight.
Wow.
And I was just going to fly back to New Hampshire with the airplane. I'd spent the night in the Utica area. So I showed up at the airport, and the ceiling was, I think, 400 feet. The freezing level was at the surface.
Wow, that's already ugly weather. Doesn't sound like a great day to fly to me.
But I could look up and I could see blue breaks through the clouds. I knew it wasn't very thick, but there were also cumulus clouds in the area. And honestly, Rob, hundreds of times I'd done that. And you pop up through it and you're on top and there's no ice and many, many times. So I found my IFR flight plan for Nashua. And
how long a flight would that have been from Utica to Nashua? Not a long flight, I assume.
No. I think in that airplane, I don't know. I think it was around an hour, maybe, maybe an hour 10. It wasn't very long. You're right. So I think I usually filed for 7,000 feet going back. And the wind was strong, a cold front just gone through. And the wind was 30 knots out of 270. Well, the county airport's runways were 3.3 and 2.7. So obviously 2.7 is my choice for departure. And I was cleared to go. I was given a clearance to heading, turn left after departure to a heading and direct to the Utica VOR, which was about 10 or 12 miles away, and climb and maintain. I think it was 5,000 was the initial climb altitude. And I did that. I made the turn, and I turned toward the VOR. And just about when I got to the VOR, I'm in the clouds, and I expected to not be in the clouds anymore. I'd gone through 4,000 feet, still climbing, and I was doing my instrument scan. I was very proficient in instrument flying, and by the way, I was flying almost every day, flying instruments almost every day. I was instructing instruments. I had some businesses, and I'd use the airplane for business travel, and I was very, very current, very proficient.
So this is not just in terms of IFR, but IMC. You were a lot of IMC time.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes, I did. Yeah. Yeah. In the Northeast, you can't help but get that. Sometimes you like not to, but it's plentiful. So as I did my instrument scan, I happened to notice the VSI all of a sudden was traveling south. It was, I'd been climbing at about 1,500 feet a minute, and the VSI is showing a decrease. And my first thought was, wow, something's wrong with the pitot static system, right? This couldn't be happening because the airplane's flying fine. And I glanced at the altimeter, and the altimeter was starting to unwind. So, now something's going on here.
Strike
so
two.
First I suspected ice. There was a little trace along the bottom of the windshield, but nothing really substantial. Looking out the windows, the airplane was white. The wings were white. There were no black strips along the front or anything, so it was very difficult to see if there was any ice on the wings. But I had to assume it was ice. So, I still had climb power in. So I lowered the nose. My airspeed was starting to deteriorate. I wanted to keep airspeed. Stalling would have been not good at that point. So I lowered the nose a little bit, pushed everything full forward on the throttle quadrant, and set the airspeed up to blue line. And I should have been climbing like crazy because the airplane was pretty light. But I wasn't. I was still coming down at like 1,500 feet per minute coming down.
But in addition to that, you've got terrain that is rising around you, isn't it? Isn't that the case?
It was, but not substantially. So the terrain really wasn't an issue at that point because I was above 4,000. This happened, and now I'm starting to come down. There wasn't anything really tall. Fortunately, I'd grown up in that area. I knew what was there. I knew where I was, and I knew where I was relative to the airport. And I wasn't terribly concerned about terrain, but something was clearly wrong. So I keyed the mic, and back then it was Griffiths Approach Control out of the Griffiths Air Force Base at Rome, New York.
Been there.
Yeah, I said, Griffiths Approach, gave the end number, and need to return to the airport. I have a problem. So he gave me a turn, gave me a heading to intercept the localizer for runway 33. Now, remember, we still have this 30 knot wind out of 270, so 33 is going to be a lot of fun to try and put that Seneca down on, but ceiling was they were still calling 400 feet, so I do a circling approach to 27 was out of the question. So I took his vector, and as I was coming down, the first thing he said was descend maintain 3,000, and I think I was at about 3,300 when he said that, and coming down like a polished crowbar. And I said, we're going to be unable to level off at 3,000 going down. He said, well, be advised, minimum vectoring altitude in the area is 2,600. Can't guarantee terrain clearance below that. I said, well, okay, doing the best I can here.
How far from the airport were you at that point?
Probably about close to 20 miles out. So I'm headed toward the localizer with this vector. He gave me an excellent vector. I intercepted the localizer and turned inbound, and I'm still descending. Everything's still full forward on the throttle quadrant. I'm still at blue line. I'm still descending. Not quite as fast. I was down maybe 1,100 feet a minute or 1,000 feet a minute down.
But you still don't see any ice, no rime ice buildup on the leading edges?
No, I really couldn't see anything, but frankly, I wasn't spending a whole lot of time looking for that either. I was pretty much glued to that panel and making sure I wasn't going to lose airspeed and that kind of thing.
And the engines were still producing full power?
Yeah, no problem. They're screaming out there. So I intercepted the localizer just outside the outer marker, and I'm maybe a half a dot low on the glide slope. Not unbelievably low, just maybe a half a dot. And I wasn't quite able to get up to the glide slope, but I knew I was safe. I knew at that point that unless something else went wrong, I was going to make it to the airport. So I continued on in, past the outer marker. Normally, I would drop the gear at the outer marker, but, the last thing I needed right now was more drag. So I just had to leave the gear up and did a little mental check of, had I paid the insurance policy on the airplane? Yeah, I had. So if we have to land gear up, it's their airplane.
I cannot imagine, Gene, that going through your head as well as just trying to maintain altitude. You're worried about the insurance company?
Well, when you own airplanes that we're in aviation business, money counts. So
okay,
this might just be the insurance company's airplane here in a very short amount of time. I loved that airplane. I hope that didn't happen. But anyway, came down and I broke out of the clouds at a little above 400, maybe 450 feet or so above the clouds. I broke out, saw the runway. I'm going to make it. Well, I'll put the gear down. So I hit the lever for the gear to go down and nothing happened.
No.
Oh, boy.
So this airplane really was the insurance company's.
Yeah, I thought pretty sure at that point it was going to be, but all of a sudden there's this loud cracking, snapping noise that didn't sound good. And I was just hoping it wasn't a wing,
Oh, gosh.
And it was apparently there was ice on the gear doors or the gear underneath the airplane. I broke the ice off with the hydraulics were strong enough to break the ice off, and the gear came down. And one by one, I got 3 green lights on there. And I pulled the power back a little bit. I still didn't dare close the throttle. I would have fallen out of the sky. And the tires squeaked down the runway. And I went to idle on the power and little braking, and I was on the ground, and I was alive. I was unharmed. The airplane was unharmed. So Tower just calmly said, to taxi to parking. Okay. So I turned off, and it took a lot of power to taxi.
That doesn't make any sense at all.
No, it didn't. So I'm thinking, well, are the brakes dragging? Where else could there be ice? And I'm still looking out the window, and I'm seeing now that there's some ice on the leading edges, but still couldn't see it very, very clearly. So I taxied over into parking. There was nobody around, and I swung into a parking spot, and I shut down and took a few good deep breaths and made sure my legs were able to hold my body if I got out to walk.
In all seriousness, Gene, though, in all seriousness, is this a case of all of a sudden the nerves caught up with you because you were probably paying so much attention and had such focus on completing the task, you didn't realize you were scared to death?
I don't have a recollection of that happening or having any thoughts like that. It certainly was a tense time, but I was okay. I got out of the airplane, and I would give anything if I had a camera. I had a cell phone, but that was before we all had cameras on our cell phones, and I often carried a camera with me, but I did not have one that day, and those pictures would be so valuable if I could have taken the pictures of the airplane.
Why is that?
Well, first of all, the wings, the ice had formed in something that's called ice horns. You can Google it and see some pictures of it online. It's very, very rare, but it takes just the right conditions. And apparently I had just the right conditions that day. And it's like it looks like the wings had horns on the front of them growing up, and it's tremendous drag. And of course it totally disrupts the airflow on the wings. And after I was amazed by that, I walked around and looked at the props. Now I was even more amazed because the props were shaped like baseball bats. There was very little airfoil to those props. The ice was so thick on the props. So that was the problem with not getting the thrust. The engines were working their little hearts out there, but the power was coming out of the engines, but the power was not being transmitted to the airframe because of the shape of those props.
Goodness, I cannot imagine what they must have appeared to be. If baseball bat is so round, I mean, there's no way you could get lift out of something like that.
Yeah, they may not have been quite that round, but that was my first thought.
Sure.
Was, wow, these things are baseball bats. They have obviously had some airfoil abilities to them,
or you would have been that polished crowbar.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So there I was, safe and sound. Unfortunately, no photographic evidence of it.
Well, I think this is a good time to take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll go over those lessons. We'll be right back. Based on Avemco claims data, did you know that 10% of accidents happen while taxiing? Does this number surprise you? Avemco Insurance Company values safety and believes strongly in continuous pilot training and education to help prevent these accidents and promote safer skies for everyone. That's why they sponsor the Fast Team Wings program and the Rider Report podcast. Avemco rewards safer pilots with premium credits through their Safety Rewards program. Earn an automatic 5% off by mentioning you're a Rider Report listener. Call 800-353-9089 for a free quote or visit avemco.com/rider report today. Premium credits are subject to underwriting guidelines, including Avemco recognized training and memberships. Now, back to the Rider Report. We're back with Gene Benson, publisher and writer of Vectors for Safety, a CFII, and a human factors expert. He safely landed a plane that had severe ice buildup. What should have been an uneventful flight turned out to be a real nail-biter. Gene, what are the lessons you learned on this flight?
Well, I learned that, first of all, if you're going to expect to punch through the clouds and be up on top, beware that there might be cumulus forecasts. And I knew that there were cumulus there. And apparently what happened to me was I was climbing up through one of those cumulus clouds. If I'd been a few miles either way, I would have been in the clear, but just so happened that I was in the cumulus cloud and, didn't know where the end of it was. So that was what happened there. But what I learned was about complacency. I considered myself to be a very good pilot. By that point in time in my career, I had maybe 14,000 hours, and I had lots of real world experience in the Northeast. And I just got complacent about the ice. I'd done that many times. And just because you do it and get lucky one time doesn't mean you'll have the same result the next time. And I'd become complacent about that and hadn't given it the respect that it deserved. And I also learned about one of the human factors is continuation bias. As human beings, once we start a task, we have a real tendency to continue it, and we just don't see evidence that may present itself that indicates we should abandon that task. And I was pretty much determined to go that day, even though I saw the forecast and I thought it'd be okay with that. And the other lesson I learned was declare an emergency. The thought of declaring an emergency never, ever crossed my mind that day. I think my mindset was, why bother? Because there's nothing they can do for me here. I can't get somebody to come up here and scrape the ice off this airplane for me. So why bother declaring an emergency? But if that gear had not come down, and I'd had a full fuel load in that airplane, and I'd gone sliding down that runway or off the side of that runway and hit something, it would have been really, really nice to have a fire truck sitting there. And, obviously the equipment had not been scrambled because I didn't declare an emergency, and I don't think the tower fully understood the situation, because I don't know how much Griffith's approach had told him. He probably just told him that he had an airplane inbound, for the approach, and tower just cleared me to land. There wasn't any other traffic. I think I was the only one foolish enough to be flying that day. So I was all by myself out there, and declare the emergency, get the equipment out there. They don't mind. They appreciate getting the practice too of having to scramble it out and get in position. It certainly is worthwhile to do that.
Those are 3 very good lessons. Don't become complacent, fight continuation bias, and don't be afraid to declare an emergency. Looking back, knowing what you know now, with freezing level at the surface and 400-foot ceilings, would you make that flight today?
Well, that's why the airports have coffee shops, Rod. You sit there and have a cup of coffee. And it's always better to be on the ground wishing you were flying than to be flying and wishing you were on the ground.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
It's so true. So true. Well, let me go back, if I can, Gene, to your college days. You had a major in psychology, and you've combined that with your passion for flying and your aviation experience and career to deal with human factors. Can you tell us a little bit about how that all came together for you?
Sure. I didn't start out in psychology. I started out in a different major that involved more science and math, and I found out I wasn't nearly smart enough to do that. But in my first semester, I took one of my core courses, which happened to be Psychology 1, Psych 101, and I just found it fascinating. It was like, wow, this is kind of why people do things, and I really enjoyed the course. It was really kind of neat. And the more I thought about it, I said, you know what? I'm just going to do this. So I changed my major, and I majored in psychology, and that was the beginning of that. I was interested in how people learn. Being a flight instructor, I was really interested in that, and I ended up later getting a master's degree in education, so I combined the psychology and the education. And then what really triggered me into going into human factors was in the course of 5 years, I had 5 friends and colleagues, all of whom I considered to be very good pilots, experienced pilots, that had serious accidents, aircraft accidents. 4 of them died. The one who did not die suffered life-changing injuries. He had a stroke while undergoing emergency surgery after his crash. So, these guys are good pilots. Why did they crash? And came out that at least 3 of the accidents, 2 of them, one of them was a mechanical failure that could not be foreseen. But and one of them, we don't know what happened. The one that had the stroke, he has no recollection of it, and nobody knows why this happened. But anyway, 3 of them were human error. They made bad decisions. And, I'm thinking, why? Well, how can this possibly be the case? So I started digging into the psychology of it, the human factors of it, and started applying that and trying to explain to pilots how we get ourselves sometimes into these situations that, we may be very smart, we may be very skilled pilots, but I could have been one of those statistics that day too, just as easily as the other ones, and the why and the how. And so I started putting together programs to maybe educate people a little bit on our humanness and how we get into those problems.
If somebody wants to learn more from you, do you have a website?
I do. I actually have 2 websites. Like you, I'm sponsored by Avemco with my safety work. And the website that I do on their behalf is called vectorsforsafety.com. Just spell the words out, not the numeral 4, and then just vectors and the word for and the word safety.com. And then my own personal website is genebenson.com.
Well, I hope that folks will go over to those sites and check them out, because the idea of declaring an emergency and not becoming complacent and not having that continuation bias. And I think there's another term that we've heard a lot about, the normalization of deviance. All of those things affect us as humans. And if we can keep those in check, I think we could make everybody a little bit safer in GA.
Absolutely. The normalization of deviance, I have a number of programs they put together. In fact, on the Vectors for Safety site, there's absolutely nothing for sale on there. Nobody's trying to get your money, but we have a number of free courses, all valid for Wings credit, and one of them is called Just This Once. And basically, it's about being normal and deviating. We think it'll be okay just this once, and we do, and it is. So then we're more likely to do it again and again and again until it isn't.
I certainly appreciate what you've shared with us, particularly with respect to the 14,000 hours you've got in your logbook. Gene Benson, thank you so much for being on The Writer Report.
Thank you for having me, Rob.
Thanks for listening. Please tell your friends that we've moved and that we really want them to join us for this new chapter in the same storytelling I've done for the last 5 years, just with a new name. We drop episodes every couple of weeks so you can hear the first-hand accounts of the flying lessons that sometimes only experience can teach. If you've got a story that you'd like to share, here's my new email address, rob@avbrief.com. That's rob@avbrief.com. The Writer Report theme and commercial instrumental music for the podcast was written and performed by Rob Pothorf. For Avemco Aviation Insurance and avbrief.com, I'm Rob Ryder. Catch you next time on The Writer Report.